What's up, everybody? Welcome to the podcast now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about 4 of the biggest mistakes I hope that Gotham Knights does not make. Now, I've made this kind of video before. I've actually think I've made this video twice before over the last, 1.5 years. Before we knew, now, the last time I made it was before we knew what this game was, before we've had some of the details about the world, about the gameplay, any of the stuff that we've seen basically since DC Phantom. So I wanted to go back in this list, and as I always tell you guys, when I make these lists, I don't look back at what I did previously, okay? So I don't remember the lists I made of all the other stuff. I wrote a brand new list of 4 different things that I think I really do think are different from what I've talked before. I want to talk about how Gotham Knights cannot do it, that they have to avoid these mistakes. Firstly, I want to know what your guys' thoughts are in the comments below on this stuff. What are some things you think the game cannot do? Secondly, as always, if you guys are not already subscribed to the channel, please do hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon so you guys know when all these videos go up. And if you guys haven't subscribed to my second channel yet, Podcast Now Plus is its name. The link for it's in the description below. A lot of the same kind of stuff that you would expect here over there. I do a lot of news stories over there, a lot of gaming, a lot of movie news stories, some experimental stuff. So again, if you guys haven't checked that out, Podcast Now Plus is the name of that channel, all right? So let's go through this. Number 1 is the reliance on playing as anybody. So let me explain this. This is a mistake they can't do, okay? I've talked about it before. I know it's maybe more of a personal, opinionated kind of thing by me, but look, when you can play as anybody and the person that you're playing as doesn't really matter in terms of the story or in terms of what's going on, you lose a lot of the, I feel like, emotional impact of that character. You're not really connecting with them much. Now, they're going to have dialogue. They're going to have personalities. They're going to have emotions. I'm not saying they're literally going to be flat characters, but when you're going through the story and it's the same exact dialogue, same exact story, even with like side villains, let's say, right? And we've talked about this. When you go to Mr. Freeze as Batgirl, is it the exact same thing as going to it as Robin? Because in which case, this is just me. I feel like that's kind of like a skin where it doesn't really matter who I'm, which is the point, because you could play it as any of them. So I get, it's not like I don't understand what they're doing. I get it. I'm just saying I feel like it's not so connected, because then I'm like, well, I don't really, you know what I mean? Like, am I going to be telling stories to you guys about how Batgirl battled Mr. Freeze, let's say? Much in the same way as like Batman in Arkham City, right? Like when Batman battled Mr. Freeze, that was an epic, that was a boss fight people still talk about today. It's not going to be very personal anymore. And this is something that I feel like is already more of the scary stuff that I am. If I'm worried about anything in this game, it is that. But that's just something I would say to keep in mind. I want to feel like when I'm playing as these characters, I truly am. And I'm sure the gameplay is going to be fine. I'm sure traversal and all the different stuff of playing as the character is going to be fine. But I want them to, like, the personality and them connecting to the other characters in the game, I want that to be pretty unique. And I would say if they don't do that, that is a pretty big mistake. The second thing, this one I'm not so worried about, but it is something to keep an eye on, is repetitive gameplay. Now's the time to bring up Avengers, right? Again, this game isn't Avengers. This game has been talked about, though, especially, even, this is what worries me about this game, another thing. Warner Bros. Montreal literally has said that this game is your standard, like, third-person, like, hack and slash kind. You know what I mean? Like, they've compared this game to the genre of games. They didn't say this is a new one of its kind. They didn't say they're doing anything vastly different. They said that this is what you would expect from the genre is what you're getting in our game. That was by the way, this is an aside, but that was a terrible statement to make, because that's just, I don't really ever want to hear that. When I see like, I know a lot of games are similar to each other, like it's very obvious. I'm not saying to lie to us, but I would hope that whenever you make a game, you are expecting that game to be different in some way, like much different than another game. Otherwise, you know what I mean? Like, why are you making it? So I've never liked that statement, but the gameplay of the Arkham games are so important. You look at Arkham Knight, and what people still talk about to this day is what saved that game is the gameplay. The gameplay is phenomenal. It still holds up now. It's like perfect. Arkham, but you look at like what Spider-Man has done. You look at what like the Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor have done. That kind of gameplay style is really good. It's one of my favorite kind of gameplay mechanics in a video game, and it's worked really well. I'm not saying they're going to do that because they can't, right? Because it definitely is going to be a different gameplay style. But whatever they settle on, which we've seen a little bit of in the gameplay trailer, it's got to be good. It's got to be good. And more importantly, again, it can't be repetitive. Now, again, Avengers is the first thing that comes to mind. I would say with Avengers, it's more of the structure that's the problem. The actual basic like attacks of your characters, and that's the thing too. Maybe I should amend what I'm saying with Gotham Knights. The gameplay, no matter what game you're going to play, is always going to get stale. Eventually, you're going to see everything there is to the game. But how you handle certain events, certain gameplay moments, that's what's important. It needs to be diverse. It needs to be different. Because if you're doing the exact same thing over and over again, like the issue with Avengers isn't that Iron Man doesn't feel like Iron Man. It's that you're facing the same 5 enemies. You're doing it the exact same way. You're facing them in the exact same areas, right? It's the same thing over and over again. And so for Gotham Knights, those are kind of back, which people I don't think necessarily even think about that when they think about what a game needs to have and doesn't need to have. But if Avengers has taught us anything, it is something that we have to pay attention to, and I hope this game does. The third thing is a lackluster story. So this is kind of fixing the mistakes of Arkham Knight. Again, what was great about Arkham Knight was gameplay. What was pretty weak about it was overall its story. Now, there's 2 different parts to this. The second part of it is actually my 4th and final point for this video. But the biggest thing and why this is number 3 and why this is I'm talking about first is the main story. Look, the Court of Owls, the whole what happened to Batman, this whole detective thing that they have really pushed for this game, it needs to be good. I mean, that's an obvious thing. When you have a single player, now there is co-op, but I would call this a single player game. When you have a story-driven game, okay, the story needs to be good. I think that's pretty obvious, but it absolutely needs to be good. If it's going to suck, if it's not going to really, tell the most fascinating of tales, if there's not going to be emotion, which goes back to point number 1, these are things that can really hurt the game. Again, Batman games, the Arkham games we've played, the biggest, I would say, pillars of them have always been the gameplay, but also the story. The story is what made, I would say, Asylum and City very special. They had a lot of good stuff going for them in Night, and a lot of the major decisions they made in Night were the things that they messed up on. So they've always had, and like Origins has had I would say a relatively strong story as well. And I get it, again, as I always say with this, I think this should be obvious, but I know sometimes I throw in Rocksteady stuff when I'm talking about, what Warner Bros. Montreal is doing, but they're all, they should be learning from everybody. And when you're part of the same publisher, by the way, you bounce ideas off each other all the time. So I'm sure they've looked at what's worked and what didn't work for Rocksteady's games, and I'm sure that'll be represented in the final product. I do want to make that pretty clear, but it's something they can't mess up on, especially because of the hype, right? Because of the Court of Owls, not everybody knows who they are, right? A more comic-driven kind of villain. There's a lot of potential there, but I think because of that, there's also more room for letdown. They could really let people down where they're expecting this really, again, maybe this detective, mystery-heavy story, all of this intrigue because of the Court of Owls, and then it's just not good, or it's just disappointing to them. And again, obviously all of it's subjective, but you have those things happen. It's not going to be, it's just not going to be good. So we'll have to see how they handle the story overall. And the 4th thing is lackluster villains. They have to watch out for that. So this goes into that, right? Because the main villain obviously is important. Again, you look at Arkham Knight for what they did with really their trio, Scarecrow, Joker, and Arkham Knight himself, of the villains, and how that didn't really work. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about amount of villains. I'm just saying whatever villains you have in this game, they got to be good. So that goes with the main story. If the Court of Owls are the main villains, they got to be good. If it's the Court of Owls and somebody else, and they're like sharing duties, they got to be good. But a thing too is, look, again, I always bring this up, like the villain wheel, the crime wheel of Arkham Knight was really good. Now, were all the villains great? No. I think the original villains, or the villains that were like the oldest, they did probably the worst job at. Like Penguin, like Nolan North's portrayal was fine and all that stuff, but like you face him so many times and there's only so much you can do, and he really relies on his henchmen so much. The Penguin stuff just wasn't all that great in Arkham Knight, I would argue. Two-Face, robbing banks, it was like, I would say Firefly and different, the Bat, like things like that. There were some really, it was very uneven, I would say, right? Some of them were really, really good, some of the side villain stuff, some of them I would say were a little bit on the weaker side. So it's not like Arkham Knight was perfect. I've always looked to that, though, as the way to do side villains, going forward. I think it's a good premise. I think it's a good idea of how they handled it and like the structure. It's just, again, more of the side stories that have to do with those villains, they have to be a little bit more well, thought out. So for this, I mean, again, this is more like, this is confirmation. We kind of know a little bit at least of how this is going to work. I mean, we saw the Mr. Freeze thing. Now he looked cool, like performance-wise, fine. Again, though, there needs to be some sort of connection to him. I need to fall for his story, whatever his story is. It needs to be long enough that there's some like development there and there's some highs and lows. So we'll see how they handle it. So far, I would say so good. I don't think it was the greatest thing ever, but I don't think it was bad either. So I'm happy with what we got. Again, like Joker or whatever if they do characters we already seen, Harley, Catwoman, whatever, they need to be good. If they do brand new ones that we haven't seen yet in games, right? And there's so many villains that we could see. A lot of people have mentioned them right in comments of villains they want to see in this game. They should be well thought out. They should. And those really, again, like that, the structure of the fighting, of like, is it going to get repetitive and stuff like that? Those are things that maybe aren't the most glaring things that you would look at right away in a game. But if they're good, they're something that makes the game very special. If they're bad, the game kind of just doesn't feel, I would say, as fully realized as it would. And that's only something we'll figure out, by the way, when the game comes out. So let me know, guys, again, in the comments below, what do you think? What are some of the biggest mistakes you think this game cannot make? What are some things that you think the game needs to do? All that stuff, let me know in the comments. Again, as always, make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel. Hit the bell icon so you guys know when all these videos go up. Again, subscribe to my second channel, Podcast Now Plus, if you haven't already. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching. More Gotham Knights stuff, as always, every 2, 3, 4-ish days. Whenever new stuff comes out, whenever I have a new idea, I'm always going to be making these videos, okay? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all on the next video.